Hello darlings, and welcome to the queer history of Doctor Who. For a show that started when homosexuality was still illegal in the UK, and a show that has had no explicit canonical LGBT representation for the majority of the time that it's been on air, there sure are a lot of queer Doctor Who fans. For this video, I want to explore the queer history of Doctor Who and its surrounding fandom. I'm really excited to look into something like this, and I think it's a really important part of the show to acknowledge. So, where better to start than with a brief timeline? The classic era. Our first stop is 1963. The first ever episode of Doctor Who, An Unearthly Child, is broadcast at 16 minutes and 20 seconds past 5, 80 seconds late due to news coverage of the Kennedy assassination which had happened the day before. The episode is produced by Verity Lambert, a Jewish woman, directed by Waris Hussein, a gay South Asian man, and homosexuality between two men is still illegal. In its early days, Doctor Who very much stayed away from sexuality of any sort. In a 1964 interview, William Hartnell said there was no sex or swearing. The production team also made sure that nothing could be inferred by the Doctor travelling with a much younger woman by making said woman his granddaughter. Speaking in a 2017 episode of Doctor Who The Fan Show, Waris Hussein said that with Doctor Who being an adventure show for children in the 1960s, there were no chance of them exploring any LGBT themes within the show. However, he said that perhaps there were some characters that could be interpreted in a subversive way, such as the character of Tigana in Marco Polo, who was everything you could possibly associate with dark forces, including being clad in black leather, the sort of figure that in the gay mind might be a certain kind of fantasy figure. It's interesting that he mentioned dark forces in reference to a gay fantasy, and while I won't go into detail on the implementation of the Hays Code in the USA, it is worth mentioning that due to the guidelines in place, motion pictures couldn't show LGBT characters in a positive light on screen. Though this was an American code, the association of queer-coded characters with darkness and villainous themes undeniably bled into British media as well. In 1965, Max Adrian guest stars in The Mythmakers. He had previously been arrested in the 1940s for the crime of importuning, a charge that was used to disproportionately target gay men. Even a flirtatious smile between two men in public could have been seen for good enough reason for an arrest. Adrian served 3 months in prison. There are some stories that say that William Hartnell wasn't willing to work with Max Adrian because of him being gay and Jewish. However, I am disinclined to believe these stories because William Hartnell had just suffered a bereavement and also his health was starting to deteriorate. The Doctor had been given fewer lines in this story due to Hartnell's arteriosclerosis, and he reportedly felt that guest stars like Adrian were upstaging him. I'm not doubting that Hartnell was certainly bigoted in certain ways. His granddaughter has stated that his language could certainly be racist or xenophobic in certain instances. I just don't want to accuse him of homophobia and anti-Semitism specifically towards Max Adrian when I couldn't find any specific evidence of it. In 1967, 4 years after the show had begun, the Sexual Offences Act was passed, decriminalising homosexual activity between two men above the age of 21 in England and Wales. This was a first step towards equality in the UK, but unfortunately social attitudes were still generally negative towards homosexuality. Moving towards the 70s, the Gay Liberation Front is founded in the UK in 1970. That same year, a court case establishes that in UK law, a person's gender cannot legally be changed from the one that they were assigned at birth. A Kiss Between Two Men is broadcast for the first time in the UK in BBC Two's broadcast of Edward II. In 1972, the first Pride in London is held and it is attended by approximately 2,000 people. In 1975, the Liberal Party becomes the first UK political party to openly support LGBT rights. There is no explicit LGBT representation in Doctor Who. However, in the 1979 story City of Death, Tom Baker's Doctor says,
"You're a beautiful woman, probably,"
which many fans have used as evidence for the Doctor's asexuality, or at the very least his lack of interest towards women. In 1980, a press conference is hastily arranged to announce Tom Baker's departure from the role of the Doctor. He teases that the new Doctor may even be a woman. This does not come to pass. as recently appointed producer John Nathan Turner is already in discussion with Peter Davison for the role. That same year, sex between two men over the age of 21 is decriminalised in Scotland, and in 1982 it is made legal in Northern Ireland. At the end of the serial Earthshock, Adric becomes the first long-time companion to die on the show. He is portrayed by Matthew Waterhouse, who is gay. Apparently he was openly gay at the time, but it was not public knowledge. In 1982's Time Flight, Michael Cashman guest stars as First Officer Bilton. Cashman would later go on to become one side of the first male same-sex kiss in a UK soap opera in 1987. The kiss was a simple peck on the forehead, and yet there was unprecedented backlash. The BBC was flooded with complaints, the tabloids forcibly outed Cashman's partner, and there were questions on the floor of Parliament as to whether it was appropriate for gay men to be kissing on a family show. In 1989, Cashman is also on one side of the first kiss on the lips between two men in a UK soap. Piers Morgan calls this a homosexual love scene between yuppie puffs in the sun. In 1989, Cashman also goes on to found Stonewall alongside Surrey and McKellen, which is founded in response to Margaret Thatcher's introduction of Section 28 in 1988. Section 28 makes it illegal to intentionally promote homosexuality or publish materials with the intention of promoting homosexuality, or to promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. The Happiness Patrol, broadcast in 1988, has been seen by some to be an allegory for Thatcher's Britain, and by extension, the implementation of Section 28. The episode is outwardly very camp in its appearance. The TARDIS is at one point painted pink, and members of this matriarchal society don colourful wigs, heavy makeup and sparkly outfits. The members of this fascist dictatorship being associated with a typically camp aesthetic, whilst protesters walk through the streets in a glum challenge of societal norms, could be seen as an inversion of a pride parade. There are also lines that line up very well with the gay experience, such as, "I'm tired of smiling and pretending I'm something I'm not." And Ace forms a very close friendship with another woman, as she does quite frequently throughout her time on the show. The conversation that she has with her friend, a former member of the Happiness Patrol, after they've been arrested, is evocative, certainly to me, of a conversation a couple might have after they've been forcibly outed. At the start of the serial, a man offers a woman a secret place where she can go to meet other people like her, other killjoys. However, this man turns out to be an undercover member of the Happiness Patrol. This scene undoubtedly echoes what members of the police force were doing to gay men in the real world, where police members would use entrapment in order to convict gay men for cottaging. At the end of the serial, the antagonist's husband runs off with another man. There is a suggestion that a man who gets publicly executed is wearing a pink triangle on his uniform. However, this is untrue, and I think it's supposed to be a symbol for the factory that he works for. Nevertheless, it's very difficult to tell that it isn't a pink triangle, so the connection can still very easily be made. This episode, airing as it did after the implementation of Section 28, is not overt in its messaging and can be read in a number of different ways. The text itself is about being able to be sad and melancholy, and being allowed to go against the social norms of the society that you exist within. So I'm sure this story is resonant with a lot of different groups of people that feel that they go against the social norm. The Archbishop of Canterbury actually mentioned this serial in his Easter 2011 sermon in relation to joy and happiness. 1989's The Curse of Fenric features a character called Dr. Judson, who is based on the real historical figure of Alan Turing. Alan Turing was a codebreaker during the Second World War and was responsible for creating the machine that broke the Enigma code. Despite his numerous contributions to the war effort, he was still convicted of gross indecency in the 1950s after having admitted to having a sexual relationship with another man. He was chemically castrated with injections of a synthetic estrogen hormone and died via cyanide poisoning in 1954, with his death being ruled a suicide. It would make sense then for a character based on him to be gay, and it was revealed in a DVD commentary that writer Ian Briggs had intended for the character's storyline to include elements of struggling with sexuality. However, with this being 1989 and Section 28 still being in force, it was not deemed appropriate to discuss matters such as homosexuality in a family programme, and so the character's frustrations were instead channeled into his disability. Briggs also stated that he had intended for another character, Millington, to be gay, and for the two characters to have a shared past. This isn't established on screen, however in the 1990 novelisation it is alluded to that both characters have feelings for men. Had this been divulged on screen, it would have made Alfred Lynch, who played Millington, the first LGBT actor to portray an LGBT character on the show. Both Millington and Judson are certainly not heroes in the story, and it is disappointing that even though they could hardly be seen to be promoting homosexuality given their moral indifference to blowing up a bunch of Russians, it still wasn't deemed appropriate for them to have been queer characters. The next serial, Survival, is the final Doctor Who story before it goes off air in 1989. Writer Rona Munro has repeatedly stated that she intended for there to be a lesbian subtext between the characters of Ace and Kara. However, she has also said that the design of Kara's costume meant that any detailed facial expressions were lost from Lisa Bowerman's performance. There is a slow-motion shot of them both running together, which I think has very romantic connotations, and also Kara's death scene is a very tender moment between the both of them. A quote that I really like from Rona Munro is, "Anywhere is the place for lesbian subtext." And again, it was the 80s, and we were all really conscious that there were certain elements missing from mainstream culture, and as far as possible, if you got a chance to chuck them in there, you were duty-bound to do it. As a side note, Survival contains one of the best ever scenes of classic Doctor Who, where the Doctor and the Master's toy boy ride at each other full pelt on motorcycles and then collide in a fiery explosion. And then there's no explanation as to how the Doctor survived it. So anyway, the last shot of Survival shows the Doctor and Ace walking away from the camera, and a voiceover that was considered more appropriate than whatever the original dialogue was is played over the shot. It is recorded on Doctor Who's 26th anniversary, on the 23rd of November 1989. These lines are the final ever recorded for the classic series. Survival Episode 3 airs on the 6th of December 1989. There is no "Doctor Who will return next year" at the end of the episode. After 26 years and 695 broadcast episodes, Doctor Who comes to an end. The Wilderness Years. 1990 marks the start of the time period known as the Wilderness Years to Doctor Who fans. LGBT rights are progressing, Section 28 is still in force, but in 1992 the World Health Organization no longer lists homosexuality as a mental illness, and in 1994 the age of consent for men who have sex with men is lowered to 18. There are no new Doctor Who episodes on TV, but that does not mean that there is no new Doctor Who content. The Virgin New Adventures book range is the place to go for new content, and it is in these books that more obvious queer representation starts to pop up. Now, I haven't personally read any of the New Adventures books, but according to the TARDIS wiki, the first unambiguous gay representation appears in Gareth Roberts' 1994 book Tragedy Day, with the character of Forgwyn. Sorry, I don't know. Unfortunately, 20 years later, Gareth Roberts would go on to make some transmisogynistic comments on Twitter, so let's move swiftly on from that. In 1995, Paul Cornell writes Human Nature, a novel starring the 7th Doctor, which he would later go on to adapt for a 10th Doctor TV story in 2007. In the original novel, the characters of Alexander and Richard are in a relationship, despite being unable to be openly gay in the 1910s. Now, technically, this same year we get the first on-screen same-sex kiss in the Doctor Who universe. This is in the direct-to-video spin-off Probe, which stars the character of Liz Shaw. Originally, I was sure I'd be able to ignore this entry into the Doctor Who universe as it wasn't produced by the BBC and it's essentially fan-made. But the BBC did give permission for Caroline John's character to explicitly be the same Liz Shaw that she was in the classic series. It also features the return of John Pertwee, Peter Davison, Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy, though they're all playing different characters as they weren't able to feature the Doctor due to licensing reasons. Doctor Who has no official canon, so you can decide for yourself whether it is or not, but it was listed in the queer representation page of the TARDIS wiki, and it also features in this unofficial History of the Doctor Who Universe book that I own, so I'm including it, I guess. So, yeah, I guess in regards to the first ever kiss between two men in the Doctor Who universe, we have to thank the writer of the probe video, The Devil of Winterbourne, some bloke named Mark Gatiss. In 1996, a court case in the UK finds that an employee was wrongfully dismissed for being about to undergo gender reassignment surgery. It's the first legal protection anywhere in the world that prevents discrimination in employment due to being trans. Oh, how far we've fallen. That same year, we get the Doctor Who TV movie. Fortunately, it does not lead to an American-produced series. The movie does cause some controversy, however, as the Doctor kisses his one-time companion Grace Holloway on the lips, suggesting that this incarnation of the Doctor may not be quite as asexual as previous incarnations had been. In fact, one fan starts a little bit of discourse on the matter, saying that the series never states that the Doctor is asexual. This fan goes by the name of Stephen Moffat. I'm sure he won't pop up again. Doctor Who gets a little bit raunchier from then on out. Later that year, a writer by the name of Russell T Davies, another person who I'm sure is completely unimportant, pens the novel Damaged Goods. This features the Doctor's companion Chris, whose last name I will not be attempting to pronounce, going to a gay club and having sex with another man. Also, Izzy Sinclair, the companion for the 8th Doctor in the Doctor Who magazine comic series, is a lesbian. The Curse of Fatal Death, a 1999 comic relief sketch, written by that Stephen Moffat bloke, and starring Rowan Atkinson as a version of the Ninth Doctor, features the Doctor regenerating into Richard E. Grant, and then Jim Broadbent, and then Hugh Grant, and then finally Joanna Lumley. The Doctor seems very happy with this situation. Her companion and fiancée, Emma, however, is not. This episode is a bit dated in its attitude towards gender and sexuality. However, it is one of the first on-screen depictions of the Doctor's gender fluidity. Obviously, it's very much not canon anymore, but Moffat has claimed that it was originally seen as a legitimate continuation of the show before the 2005 revival. Lesbian, gay and bisexual people are permitted to serve in the armed forces in 2000, and Section 28 is abolished in Scotland, but not in the rest of the UK. In 2001, the age of consent is finally equalised, and BBC Books publishes Kate Orman's The Year of Intelligent Tigers, which features the 8th Doctor joining an orchestra and forming a close bond with its conductor, Carl. Although their relationship is left up for interpretation in the book, Orman did state on her live journal that she intended for their relationship to be a sexual one. 2003 marks the year of Section 28 finally being repealed after 15 years. The vote passes in September, and just a few days later, news breaks that a new version of Doctor Who will be returning to UK TV screens, now under head writer Russell T Davies, who is known for his work on shows such as Queer as Folk. Before the new series of Doctor Who starts to air in 2005, the Gender Recognition Act is passed in 2004, giving trans people legal recognition in their gender. New Who. Finally, in 2005, Doctor Who returns to TV, and with Russell T Davies in charge, it won't be long until we see an explicitly LGBT character on our screens. The use of the term gay, in reference to sexuality and not mood, is heard for the first time when Christopher Eccleston's 9th Doctor casually says,
"That won't last, he's gay and she's an alien."
Considering sexuality was never really acknowledged in the classic series, and that's including heterosexuality, as it was kept pretty tame due to its status as a children's programme. It is exciting to hear a casual mention of LGBT identities without it being a big thing. Rose does then call the Doctor gay as an insult in Aliens of London.
It hurts! It's so gay!
And Russell T Davies has said that even though it is outdated now, he was just writing how people spoke back in 2005. And as someone who was alive, actually, in 2005, I can tell you that it was very much how people spoke. Another notable moment early on in the 2005 reveal is that Lady Cassandra, the self-proclaimed last human, says the line,
"That's where I used to live when I was a little boy."
And this certainly implies that perhaps Cassandra is a trans woman. Of course, her obsession with surgery and her villainous plan to gain money for more of it is perhaps not a shining beacon of trans representation in Doctor Who, but it is something. There are trans women who spoke more personally on Cassandra's trans status than I ever could, so I'll link any articles below. Russell T Davies would later go on to add some trans representation in his 2018 novelisation of his first episode, Rose, wherein Mickey's friend Sally hasn't gone back to her parents' house since she started her transition. The 9th episode of the 2005 series is given to Stephen Moffat to write. The brief he's given includes a number of conditions about a new character that the series is set to introduce. He's a military man, heroic, dashing, good with guns, and, oh yeah, pansexual. The Empty Child introduces Captain Jack Harkness, and he would go on to become the first on-screen explicitly queer character to travel in the TARDIS. Whilst Rose at first seems uncomfortable with the prospect of Jack flirting with another man, soon after he's flirted with her, the Doctor is completely unfazed by the prospect. As the Doctor says,
"Relax, he's a 51st century guy. He's just a bit more flexible when it comes to dancing."
whilst today the Doctor's comment might seem like an unnecessary explanation of sexuality, for a positive reaction to pansexuality to be shown in a tea time family show in 2005, that was a fantastic step in the right direction for LGBT fans. I am choosing to refer to Jack as pansexual, as that is probably the label that fits him best. The character has always avoided labels, calling human categories of sexuality quaint, and he was referred to as omnisexual at one point during an audio drama, referring to the fact that when it comes to sexuality in the Doctor Who universe, you are not limited to just the human species. As the Doctor said in Jack's introductory story,
"So many species, so little time."
bisexual was also a label that was applied to him, particularly back when the character first appeared, and that's hardly an incorrect label either. In fact, Russell T Davies said that in creating the character, it's time you introduce bisexuals properly into mainstream television. Pansexuality and bisexuality are intrinsically linked, and I'm just choosing to refer to Jack as pan because I don't really think gender comes into the equation for him. Additional side note, Davies recently said, in reference to Marvel's Loki mentioning his bisexuality, Loki makes one reference to being bisexual once, and everyone's like, oh my god, it's like a pansexual show. It's like one word. He said the word prince, and we're meant to go, oh, thank you, Disney, aren't you marvellous? It's a ridiculous, craven, feeble gesture towards the vital politics and the stories that should be told. He's right, and he should say it. If we could have out and proud Captain Jack running around on our screens in 2005, then Marvel and Disney can do a much better job than a one-off line in 2021. In the final episode of the first season, we have the first on-screen same-sex kiss in the main Doctor Who show. Jack kisses Rose on the lips as a final farewell, and then he kisses the Doctor in the exact same way. It isn't mentioned by any of the characters as it being an unusual thing. A beautiful moment broadcast on primetime telly to an audience of families just 2 years after Section 28 had been repealed. 2006 brings with it another series of Doctor Who, as well as the first season of its post-Watershed spin-off Torchwood. In the main series, the most notable queer characters are that of Jake and Ricky, the freedom fighters of Rise of the Cybermen's Parallel Earth. Although they aren't canonically acknowledged as partners, a deleted scene has Jake say,
"I'll never have another boyfriend like him."
It's a shame this line was cut from the original broadcast, and I can't find any reason it was given for them doing so. Torchwood is a very queer series. Creator Russell T Davies has expressed before that he believes sexuality is fluid, and the Torchwood team is the perfect example of that. In the first season of the show, every single main character has a non-hetero fling, even those who do express attraction towards members of the opposite sex. And Jack, the main character and queer icon, is canonically immortal and cannot die, making sure that the bury your gays trope cannot happen to him. I was too young to watch it when it originally aired, but when I did finally get around to seeing it, my young bi heart was very, very happy. Obviously, that's not to say that Torchwood is perfect. There is a very transphobic line in the episode Greeks Bearing Gifts by Toby Whithouse, which makes absolutely no sense coming out of the mouth of a character who is from a culture that is supposedly beyond sexuality and gender. Essentially, Torchwood as a whole is a very messy show, but that doesn't take away from the positive steps that it made into portraying flexible sexuality. Doctor Who continues its track record of casually including LGBT characters throughout 2007, including Shakespeare casually flirting with the Doctor, the married Cassini sisters, Tallulah's comment about the Doctor liking musical theatre, and Jack admitting that he feels much the same way about the Doctor as Martha does. For the 2008 season, the most interesting piece of planned queer representation that never actually appeared on screen was that in Stephen Moffat's two-parter Silence in the Library, Forest of the Dead, Donna's husband in the virtual world of the library was originally intended to be a trans man. This would have been revealed at the end of the story, where Lee would have been shown to have been assigned female at birth. This was cut as they didn't believe it had been established well enough that you could change your appearance within the virtual world. Whilst it would have been cool to confirm a character as trans, I can see why it was cut, and not having any trans actors involved in the portrayal of a trans character would have been a mistake. Another notable moment in queer Doctor Who history is that the season 4 finale, Journey's End, is screened in Trafalgar Square at London Pride in 2008. In 2009, David Cameron formally apologises on behalf of the Conservative Party for Section 28, and in 2010, Stephen Moffat takes over as head writer on the show. In 2011, on a chat show, Matt Smith states that he sees his version of the Doctor as asexual. I do think this comment comes across more as seeing asexuality as alien rather than a valid sexuality in its own right. Not that I think Smith is purposefully misinterpreting asexuality, I just think it comes from a lack of knowledge around it. Season 6 of Doctor Who in 2011 includes the character of Canton, who wants to marry a man but is denied the right by President Nixon. The thin, fat, married, gay Anglican Marines exist, and yes, that is their name. A more impressive gay partnership is that of Silurian Madame Vastra and her soon-to-be wife Jenny, who will make multiple reappearances.
Good evening. I'm a lizard woman from the dawn of time, and this is my wife.
The Corsair, though never featured on screen, is mentioned in The Doctor's Wife, and the Doctor says that they had both male and female incarnations. In 2012, Jenna Coleman's surprise first appearance as the character of Oswin establishes that her first ever crush was on a girl, though she does later dismiss this as being a phase. However, when Clara is established as a full-time companion, she does make a comment about what a great kisser Jane Austen was, and she also mentions in the novelisation of The Day of the Doctor that she thought Kate Stewart fancied her, and she did consider going for a drink with her. Since we're considering Probe to be a valid source of representation in this timeline, in 2014 it is shown that Liz Shaw is in a relationship with another woman. We also see the Master again in the main series, though this time in a female body, which does confirm that Time Lords are able to change gender when they regenerate. 2015's Sleep No More is the first time a trans actor has appeared in Doctor Who, with Bethany Black portraying 474, a grunt who is often referred to as It, which really could have been better, but it was still really cool to see her in that role. The Christmas special of that year also shows River flirting with another woman, and she does also mention her second wife. River is bi. River is bisexual. Do not deny it. River is bi. The 2016 spin-off Class also has a gay couple in its central cast of characters. Bill Potts joins the 12th Doctor's TARDIS in 2017, the first on-screen lesbian companion, with her sexuality being a big part of her story without it being the only aspect of her personality. Bill is explicitly openly, unapologetically gay, and it is her love for another woman that eventually saves her life. The end of The Doctor Falls was one of the admittedly large number of times that I have absolutely just sobbed my heart out at a piece of media. The episode Knock Knock has a character mention that their granddad went backpacking with his boyfriend. In the original script, it was going to be established that this granddad was the character of Harry Sullivan, a companion to the Fourth Doctor. This line wasn't in the broadcast version, as it was thought that a general audience wouldn't have enough knowledge of Harry to be able to get the reference. And then, at the end of the 2017 Christmas special, the Doctor regenerates into a woman, making the Doctor, canonically, gender fluid. This new incarnation brings with her yet more queer characters, with Angstrom mentioning that she had had a wife, Frankie the PA mentioning she has a wife and then immediately dying, and then Richard the security guard mentioning that he has a boyfriend and then immediately dying. James First is also shown to have an attraction towards men. One character that I wasn't sure whether to include in this is Yos in the Sarangra Conundrum. He is a member of an alien species where both males and females can get pregnant. Whilst the character is not exactly a perfect representation of a human pregnant trans man, the pregnancy itself is taken seriously throughout the story, and it could definitely be seen as another positive step forwards. But at the same time, it's not exactly trans representation, so 2020 sees us meet the characters of Jake and Adam, who are in a troubled marriage, but then eventually we realise their love for each other at the end of the episode. And they also make it all the way through to the end of the episode without dying. There's also the first non-binary human character in the Doctor Who universe, with that of Calypso Jones in the Lovecraft Invasion audio series. They are voiced by non-binary actor Robin Holdaway. Over the 2020 lockdown, Russell T Davies writes an audio story called Farewell Sarah Jane, and in this it is revealed that Fourth Doctor companions Tegan and Nyssa are now a couple and living together in Australia. Whether this is still canon or not is brought into question by Tegan's return in 2022, as she mentions her husbands but not Nyssa. However, I'm just choosing to believe that they are still a couple, as it doesn't technically contradict anything, so... That same audio also reveals that Sarah Jane's son Luke is now married to his former uni roommate Sanjay. Luke's feelings about Sanjay were going to be included in the original Sarah Jane Adventures series, but unfortunately we lost the amazing Elizabeth Sladen before the storyline could be completed. Finally, in 2022, it's revealed that the Doctor's companion Yaz has feelings for the Doctor, and the Doctor, although she says that she's not able to be fixed to anybody, does return those feelings to some degree. Although the Doctor has kissed members of the same sex to the body that they currently inhabit on screen, this is the first time they've had a same-sex romance. Although the Doctor and Yaz's relationship doesn't get the same attention as, say, the Doctor and Rose's or the Doctor and River's, it was still there, and it was still nice to see. Okay, that concludes my very quick and concise history of the queer Doctor Who universe. I've left out a lot of the extended universe media, particularly the stuff since 2005, so there is plenty more out there to be found. I also haven't directly read or listened to some of the books and the audio in this list, so if I have made any mistakes or missed any key moments, then I do apologise for that. Why does Doctor Who resonate with queer fans? So, why do LGBT people love Doctor Who so much? Obviously, it's got a pretty good track record in the representation department, but there are still plenty of queer fans who love the classic series just as much. In fact, in 1994, the Sisterhood of Khan was formed. This was a fan club specifically for gay fans of the series. They still run today, and they have a Facebook page if you want to check it out. I think the first thing we need to look at is what the Doctor stands for. A recurring theme in Doctor Who is standing up and fighting for the oppressed and against the oppressor, a theme that will definitely resonate with many marginalised communities, and it makes sense why it would call specifically to LGBT people. In the second ever story, the Doctor and friends are up against the Daleks, a race that wants to eliminate differences and have only the Daleks remain. The Doctor, every time they fight the Daleks or the Cybermen, is fighting for the right to individuality, to be your own person, to not be like the crowd. And that's something that LGBT people have been fighting for the majority of recent history. I'm sure that for a lot of LGBT fans of the classic series, it was nice to think that the Doctor would be on your side in real life. Another reason that I think queer fans are drawn to Doctor Who is that the Doctor's expression of masculinity isn't in the same vein as a lot of the popular male heroes of the time. Violence and sex were often intertwined with the action heroes of the big screen. If you think of James Bond, you're probably going to think of shooting bad guys and bedding sexy ladies. Or if you're thinking of sci-fi particularly, Star Trek's Captain Kirk is definitely portrayed in the main show as quite explicitly heterosexual. The Doctor was never really like that. Obviously, with Doctor Who being a children's show, there is a distinct lack of sexuality in the classic series. The closest the Doctor ever gets to a canonical romance is that time he gets accidentally engaged to an Aztec woman.
Where did you get hold of this?
My fiancée.
I see. You're what?
Yes, I made some cocoa and got engaged.
The Doctor's lack of interest in sexual or romantic relationships with female characters is definitely relatable to a gay or an ace audience. Whatever team is travelling in the TARDIS at any one time is its own found family of misfits, and from different times and different places, all experiencing this adventure together. Sounds very similar to the communities that have formed around sexuality and gender expression over time in the real world. I don't want to call the Doctor a pacifist, as I think that maybe simplifies it a bit too much, but the Doctor's leading philosophy has always been that every peaceful option should be explored fully first before resorting to violence, and I think for a lot of people that was a very refreshing take on a character. The Doctor does not revel in violence, he does not take it lightly. He's not a macho hero. He doesn't present himself as a particularly cool character. In fact, he presents himself as a bit of a clown most of the time, but that doesn't prevent him from being an incredibly flawed, nuanced character capable of acts of self-sacrifice or incredible darkness. I think the Doctor is a great representation of what masculinity could be, and I think for people who didn't feel that they conformed to society's expectations of their gender, then the Doctor was certainly someone to look up to. There are also other characters that the queer community has latched onto over the years and claimed as their own. I think the most obvious one for me is Ace. Ace is a bit of a tomboy who regularly forms close female friendships with the other women that she meets on her travels. Notably in Ghostlight, when asked to dress more appropriately for the time period, she opts to dress in a men's dinner tuxedo rather than a gown, convincing her new friend Gwendolyn to do the same. It's also been pointed out that in The Curse of Fenric, when Ace is supposedly flirting with these soldiers, it comes across as incredibly awkward and strange due to the really weird choice of dialogue. Honestly, when I watched it, I wasn't even really sure that she was actually supposed to be flirting. It makes sense then, with all this evidence as to why someone like Ace would be interpreted as a gay woman, or at the very least somebody for queer people to look up to and relate to. I've also heard secondhand from somebody who was at a convention that Sophie Eldred herself said that Ace was totally gay. So the Doctor himself is very much an outsider. He essentially didn't vibe with the culture and expectations of Time Lord society, and so he left. The other Time Lords view him as strange and different to themselves. They don't really understand why he would spend so much time hanging around humans and visiting Earth. In the article Gender and the Quest in British Science Fiction Television, there is a quote from gay classic Who fan Martin Warren who says, "There is something to be argued about my experience as a child, then a nascent gay teen, then a fledgling queer adult, and finally a cognizant gay man about the otherness of the Doctor and the idea that this might have been attractive. His ability to change yet remain the same, his isolation in the midst of a group that loves him, the push and pull of wanting to belong and yet resisting acceptance." Doctor Who has also just always been incredibly camp, particularly in the 80s. The wobbly sets, the questionable acting, the ridiculous costuming, all of this comes together in this sort of wonderful bad but good soup. And a major part of LGBT culture is embracing bad aesthetics and making them our own. To paraphrase Russell T Davies from Pride Cymru's Who's Queer Now panel, camp is not just funny and silly, it is capable of a lot of depth and darkness within it. The cheap openness and unfinished nature of Doctor Who leaves holes that you have to use your own imagination to fill in, and that makes you engage with the show on a deeper level. I think sci-fi in general is often embraced by the queer community as it takes you away from a world where not everyone thinks that you deserve human rights into a world where the main things the characters are having to worry about is getting blown up by robots or surviving a crashing spaceship, whilst also dealing with very real-world problems but also being distanced enough by the alternative setting that it is a safe space to explore these issues. I also like Russell T Davies' explanation for why there are so many gay fans of Doctor Who. He said, it's a very imaginative act to watch Doctor Who, and I think gay people are better and cleverer and more imaginative than anyone else. When it comes to Davies' rebooted modern series, it does make more sense as to why queer fans latched onto it. For some people who are growing up watching it, it was an important part of learning to come to terms with your own gender or sexuality. Seeing normalised, casually queer characters regularly on screen was a really important part for the generation of children growing up with the show and for their parents as well. A family show that included queer characters regularly and never questioned their need to be there was a great way of normalising the idea that queer people exist and are also just people. The recent inclusion of Time Lords being able to regenerate into a different gender has also helped people explore their own experience of gender as well. Maura Harris wrote in Pink News that when it comes to seeing Time Lords be able to switch gender, being out as non-binary now, I truly appreciate this aspect of the characters. It showed me that gender was as flexible as I wanted it to be, and it also showed me that gender was as important as I wanted or needed it to be, as there were so many other fun things and amazing qualities you can have outside of that. LGBTQ+ representation throughout the show's run helped me normalise queerness in all its forms as I grew up. Even now, when I rewatch episodes, I feel a sense of pride. Bethany Black, who played 474, said in an article, All I know is that seeing the Doctor regenerate into a woman this time, and seeing that same character whose basic moral and emotional centre has remained unchanged since that November night in 1963, would have meant the world to me as a kid growing up and watching this. It would feel like real representation that I didn't see anywhere else in the 80s. Heck, it meant that to 43-year-old me who sits down in front of the telly with Marmite on toast and a cup of tea to watch Doctor Who now. I hope it carries on representing that for at least another 60 years. Queer fandom. There are plenty of queer fans of Doctor Who, but what about queer fandom? That is, queer content created by and for fans. Not all queer content is created by queer fans. There are plenty of instances of, for example, slash fiction which is created by straight women. But nevertheless, it's something that I was thinking about and I just wanted to explore a little bit. Doctor Who fandom started in the form of fan clubs and fanzines. Fanzines are unofficial publications that are often contributed to by a number of different fans of the media that they are focused on. They may include fan art, fanfic, meta-analysis, or anything else that a creator wants to contribute. Unfortunately, it was really hard to find information on what was included in a lot of early fanzines, as this was obviously pre-internet. Whilst it's fairly easy to find the Kirk Spock fanzine fiction of the 1970s onwards, any evidence of pre-1990s Doctor Who gay pairings evades me. This could be for a number of reasons. First off, Star Trek had a largely female following, and that does lend itself to more contributions of fan works, whereas the Doctor Who fandom pre-2005 was mostly male. That isn't to say that there were no queer Doctor Who fan works out there, but it does seem that the Doctor Who fan community was mostly focused on producing gen works. So that's just works that didn't really focus on a sexual or romantic pairing. And with the show being what it is, that makes a lot of sense. I was expecting to find more older fan content that shipped the Doctor and Jamie together. Because I have heard tale that the showrunners at the time wanted to avoid any accidental sexual connotations with the Doctor and his female companions, so they limited how much physical contact they could have. However, this rule didn't apply to Jamie, who is regularly found clinging to the Doctor. I genuinely couldn't find any actual confirmation from a direct source that the not touching female companions thing was a thing, but I do believe that there was probably some rule to some degree that existed. But alas, I could only find more modern content for that pairing, and I was looking for kind of more historical works. So if you do know of anything, please let me know. A place that I did have some success looking into was the pairing of the Doctor and the Master. Now, the show itself has more recently leaned into the homoerotic undertones of the pairing, with John Sims' Master saying things like,
I like it when you use my name.
On AO3 today, the ship is the most popular in the classic series works and the 10th most popular in the new series. So I did a little bit of research, and the earliest documented fic that explores a romantic pairing between the two, which was listed on the fanlore wiki, is something that was originally published in a 1993 fanzine. The fic is called The Ring of Truth. It is still available to read online, and it explores the idea of the Doctor and the Master having been married on Gallifrey, and this conversation that they have about it, and then by the end of it, they've broken off their union. Interpretations like this make a lot of sense. In the comic relief sketch Time Crash, the 5th Doctor asks the 10th Doctor if the Master still has a beard, and the 10th Doctor says, no beard, well, a wife. There's a very clear jab at the supposed queerness of the Master there. And to be honest, in the classic series, the Master does do a whole lot of tying men up, and in the TV movie, he does keep going on about how much he needs the Doctor's body. Also, the Doctor and the Master do have a really interesting potential as these two essentially immortal beings wrapped in this sort of endless battle of wits. My personal interpretation of the Master is that they do just keep coming up with like weird, crazy, evil plans in order to get the Doctor's attention because they have some kind of codependency thing going on. I did have a quick look on AO3, and the earliest queer pairing on there is from 1999, and it's between the Doctor and Turlough. It's certainly arguable that Turlough is queer-coded. Those shorts in Planet of Fire are enough evidence for me. Elizabeth Sandifer's article on TARDIS Eruditorium argues that Tolo is queer-coded through his cowardly and typically unmasculine personality. He's shown as delicate and fragile and is introduced as being a student at an all-boys public school. So yeah, I can see that. I'm really sorry, it's getting really dark in here because it's December in the UK, but it's probably fine. Apologies if my face actually disappears through the second half of this. Of course, we can't talk about Doctor Who and interpretation of sexuality without talking about the Doctor's perceived asexuality. When it comes to the Doctor, it seems like I said before, that all mainstream discussions of the Doctor's asexuality come from a place that fundamentally misunderstand it as a sexual orientation. Asexuality, like all sexualities, is a spectrum, and people who identify as asexual or ace may fall anywhere on that spectrum or may move around it throughout their life. Being asexual may mean that you don't feel sexual attraction towards others but can still enjoy the feeling of sex, or it may mean that you're sex repulsed and don't enjoy the feeling at all. Being ace also doesn't mean that you can't experience romantic attraction, and again, an ace person can fall anywhere on the romantic orientation spectrum. An aromantic asexual person may not feel any sexual or romantic attraction towards anyone, whereas a biromantic asexual person may feel romantic attraction towards any gender, but no sexual attraction towards them. There is also demisexuality, which is again part of the asexuality spectrum, where you only experience sexual attraction once you've known the person for a while. Okay, I hope that establishes that being ace is not just one thing, and that you can also have sex or experience sexual attraction and still be ace. I just wanted to make that clear because I think a lot of people think that there's no way that the Doctor can possibly be ace, whereas in actuality there is a lot of validity to those fan interpretations. Whilst we can certainly agree that the Doctor's lack of sexual interest towards anyone in the classic series certainly came from him being a character in a BBC children's show, I think it's important to realise that giving the Doctor a sexual element to their character isn't necessarily something that should be done in order to make them more progressive. Like I said earlier, the Doctor's lack of heterosexuality was something that queer fans latched onto as a reflection of themselves. Whilst the Doctor's asexuality can be comforting and relatable to people in real life, the discussions around it can often quite literally alienate people. A lot of fans insist on the Doctor's asexuality due to the fact that the character is an alien and they need to feel better than or different to humanity. You can see why hearing that only an alien like the Doctor could be asexual or aromantic would be very alienating to the people who identify with those labels in real life. Speaking at the 2019 Gallifrey 1 convention, Aero Ace fan Michaela said in their talk titled Asexuality, Aromanticism and Doctor Who, the other problem is that the idea that an asexual or aromantic Doctor, a Doctor that doesn't experience romantic or sexual attraction, is somehow more alien, less human. It reinforces the idea that to be asexual, to be aromantic, is to be other. So whilst it's great to see the Doctor as asexual and or aromantic, we do need to be really careful with the language that we're using when we're discussing that. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is feel free to interpret the Doctor's sexuality however you want. Feel free to make their sexuality as fluid with every incarnation as their gender is, but be aware that asexuality and aromanticism are not alien, they are inherently human. Right, I will end my little exploration into queer fandom with the show's most recent dabble with romantic relationships, Phasmin. It has been confirmed that the romance between the Doctor and Yaz came about due to fan reaction to the couple's chemistry. I'm not going to say whether I think that this approach to writing romance is necessarily a good thing, but nevertheless, a want for a gay relationship did result in canonically queer characters. The first fic that I found on AO3 dates to February 2018. The Woman Who Fell to Earth didn't air until that October, so clearly there was some fan demand for queer romance in the TARDIS. And it makes sense when the Doctor has canonically had romances with female characters before, that fans would want that continued with a female Doctor. So the fandom embraced the idea of a relationship between the Doctor and Yaz, and the fact that Jodie Whittaker and Mandip Gill are friends off screen as well really did add to the couple's chemistry. It was supposedly Whittaker herself who pointed out that fan speculation existed about the two characters. So eventually the writers decided to make Yaz's feelings for the Doctor canon, and we probably wouldn't have seen a queer romance storyline directly involving the Doctor without that fan input. I'm not saying that it was a perfect storyline. If anything, I think they left it too late to introduce it and then didn't give Yaz's feelings enough attention in the finale. I'm also just not a great fan of Doctor-companion relationships, but it did mean a lot to me for a character that I absolutely adored growing up with get to have a queer storyline. Like I say, I would have loved to have seen it done in more depth, but it's still, you know, a good thing. And I hope in the future we get to see more of the Doctor's flexible sexuality and gender. Whew, okay, that's all I really had to talk about. So a little summary for you. If you're still here after all that, then thank you. It is incredibly dark now. I don't know if you can still see me. Thank you for sticking around. Anyway, this subject is very close to my heart, and Doctor Who has a really long queer history, and I definitely won't have covered every aspect of it in this video. So if there are any interesting elements that I've missed, or you've got any personal insights that you want to share, then please do. I would love that. That'd be great. This show's commitment to including LGBT characters hasn't always been perfect, but it sure has done a hell of a lot more than certain other shows that were popular on the internet in 2013. Thank you for watching!